and welcome to the Print Soft Cover. Today we have with us independent journalist Kunal Purohit. Kunal is the author of H-Pop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. Thank you for joining us today, Kunal.
Thank you, Antara. It's a pleasure.
So the book talks about how popular forms of entertainment are being weaponized to further the Hindutva agenda. So just to get started, Kunal, now what we're seeing is a Hindutva that is accessible, it's entertaining, it's easily consumable. So what do you think about the kind of impact this is going to have, especially in the run up to the elections? How are these talents kind of going to be utilized?
So I think broadly what we're seeing is that, the kind of work that I describe in the book and the kind of worlds that I describe in the book, which are, people who are extremely popular, who command millions of people, their loyalties are constantly sort of, being commanded by all of these folks that I talk about in the book. These people have created a world where it is normal to be sort of speaking about hate towards other religions as a form of supremacy towards the Hindu religion. What they've done is they've created enemies who they believe are enemies of the Hindu religion, and hence enemies of all Hindus. And that is the constant message that you see being reinforced through the work that I've described in the book, be it through music, be it through poetry, or be it through books, and the whole Hindutva publishing industry that I've talked about. These people, in all of the years that they've been silently trying to do this, they've moved from smaller, urban, smaller, rural and semi-rural centers, and now increasingly their popularity has brought them towards the urban, cities and centers of India. And as a result of the millions that they command, they're now very, very effective campaigners for the BJP. And we've seen some of that in the UP elections, and my book talks about at length the effect that Hindutva pop had in sort of boosting the BJP's chances, especially in places where the BJP was actually quite weak. So we've seen some examples of how this is playing into the BJP's electoral might as well. And the book, I mean, you've read the book, so you'd know this, Antara. The book ends at a very tantalizing point where all of the three principal characters are gearing up towards the 2024 elections, and thinking of it as a personal mission of sorts. And all of the three are very geared up to be able to, sort of push the cause of Hindutva, be it with the BJP or be it against the BJP. And there are some elements within that world who are also working against the BJP. So all of them are wanting to create an impact, and I think we are going to increasingly see signs of popular culture forms, be it music, poetry, and books that I write about, but even cinema. Let's not forget what we've seen in the last 2 months.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book as well, and in the end, you mentioned the Kerala story.
The Kerala story, the Kashmir files. We're going to be seeing increasing convergences between the world of Hindutva and all of these worlds. And all of that is geared up to not just push Hindutva in the long term, but in the short term, ensure that the BJP continues to, sort of be able to set their agenda, to be able to gain a broad mandate from different parts of the country. And that is what my fear is, and my feeling is that is what we are going to be seeing in the 2024 elections as well, Antara.
So again, with H-pop stars, especially in the beginning of their careers, like I think with Kavi in particular, you really pick up on what's sort of trending. You really pick up on what people are angry or upset about. And this is shaped, back then, this was shaped by the BJP, say through the speeches of politicians. So now, do you think we're at this juncture, we're on our way to that juncture where we're going to be seeing the inverse? Their H-pop stars, they'll be doing the opinion shaping, and politicians are going to be deriving from it.
So in the process of writing my book, Antara, I saw how both of these are actually not two different stages. We are in a space where both of these stages coexist with each other. So sometimes you will see BJP leaders, BJP sort of workers, ministers trying to create, an agenda, trying to create new points of rallying their troops, their Hindutva troops around. But often what we see is that the demand, or the agenda or the narrative comes from below. So they sense that there are all of these conversations that are happening, and hence those conversations then get pushed and picked by the central BJP. So we are already seeing how both of these worlds are coexisting, and I'll give you an example of this. Much before the Uttar Pradesh government in its previous term, in the Yogi government in its previous term, sort of spoke about how there is a need to bring a population control law. We were seeing a massive campaign, but again, very silently carried out within these spaces, within these Hindutva spaces, of campaigning for a law which prohibits, two or more children, and sort of also looks at penalizing offenders. Now, the demand might sound religion agnostic, but the bottom line of the demand, and sort of what they're really saying with that demand, is looking at how Muslims in the country and Islam in general is locked in a conspiracy to have a demographic takeover of India of sorts. And this was the agenda that was being spoken about for many months, and possibly even years, before the Yogi government actually reacted to this. So while on the outside we didn't know that the mobilization for a demand like this was already ongoing, when you're inside these worlds, you understand that mobilization happens over months, and sometimes weeks and months and years, and it's then finally validated by the government, or by BJP ministers and leaders. So I think we're already seeing both of these different forms coexisting.
Yeah. So all three of them, whether it's Kavi, Kamal, Sandeep, and Sandeep, I think an extreme case, they have very big dreams, very lofty ambitions. But I also somewhere get the sense that, because you mention a lot of other people in your book, they don't feature as prominently, but there are a lot of other names. So they seem to be kind of a dime a dozen as well at one level. So do you think these are kinds of achievable dreams, these dreams of, transcending social media and getting onto the political stage?
I think what I did find, Antara, when I was dealing with all of these different characters, and sort of talking
Yeah.
about their vision of what the country should be, what I did find was that the demands in itself were sort of not the end goal for some of them. It's the mobilization towards the demand that also becomes sort of really the more important and the core agenda in some ways. So, for instance, you mentioned Sandeep Dev, and one of his sort of constant rhetorics, and one of his dreams, if I can call it, is to be starting these centers where Hindu boys can be imparted knowledge of not just the Vedas and the Puranas, but also of using different arms, and using different techniques and weapons, so that they can defend themselves, right? Now, he's been working towards the demand, and he was nearly set to be opening one such center in Delhi just before the pandemic struck. But I think what is important is that the mobilization that he ensures is created with these demands is very powerful, and the mobilization itself leads to a lot of people being able to actually sponsor and fund some of these demands, right? So his audience base is constantly then told that Hindus are in danger, and Hindus might be also in physical danger. They will have to at some point fight a war against enemies, and enemies mostly are Muslims, but they can also be Christians, and he has a long laundry list of who the enemy is. So his mobilization is constantly towards saying that I need to build these centers, and hence I need all of this support from all of you. It's in some ways it's immaterial whether the center gets built or not. But what he's managed to do in just rallying people towards building the center is that he's got all of these people hooked onto the idea that Hindus are in physical danger, and that it's legitimate to be, asking Hindus to be armed, and Hindus to be, sort of trained in weapons, so that they can fight a war with enemies of the Hindus. So I think as you said, some of their demands and dreams might seem a way too ambitious, but I think it's the process which sometimes is way more important than the final result. Surely that is the case with Sandeep Dev in the instance I said.
Yeah. So you mentioned mobilization, and I think really what these three have done, and so many others as well, is that they've been able to harness the power of social media. They know their audience, they know how to zero in. So, could you just talk a bit about how these people have been able to harness social media, how they've cultivated their public personas using social media, using YouTube as a vehicle?
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the things that struck me, quite prominently with all of them, is that they were definitely, they were doing what, as you said, a lot of others also do in this Hindutva space. But what really set them apart was the fact that they were not just restricting themselves to social media. They were constantly harnessing the energies, the support that they were getting from people on social media, and utilizing it to actually do things on the ground. In Kavi's
Yeah.
case, it was the concerts that she was doing. She was touring the country. In Kamal's case, it is the Kavi Sammelans that he's going to, the other work that he's doing, with the BJP and for allied organizations like the VHP and so on. And in Sandeep Dev's, it is his own political journey, as well as his own sort of his publishing house that he has now started, and he's running very dominantly. So there is that offline aspect which is very, very strong in the case of all of these three, and that is really why I've also chosen to feature these three, because they're doing things on the ground as well. But you're absolutely right. I mean, look, as much as they do things on the ground, I think the popularity that social media would give them is unparalleled, right? Sandeep has to really just come on air for half an hour, 45 minutes every day, uh, talk to all of his people, and he has what, a few tens of thousands of people joining in and supporting his cause. That's all really that he has to do. So he's all of them have constantly sought to use the numbers that India social media platforms very readily bring to them, numbers of Hindu right-wing supporters who want to see that kind of rhetoric on social media. All of the three have used it very, very effectively and very potently in some ways. For instance, Kavi Singh, the singer I talk about in the book, she didn't really have a very big social media platform, and nor did she have a very sort of prominent persona. But in the pandemic, she ensured that her offline persona, which was the singer who was going around and making all of these concert stops, that switches into an online persona where she would come online. She would not just be releasing these Hindutva songs, but then she would ensure that every time there was something that happened which would interest the Hindu right wing, she would come online and she would say a few things about the instance. And again, those speeches were also very much in tune with the hardline Hindutva image that she had to create for herself. So in some ways, social media really ensured that wherever there were rough edges, social media ensured that they could be smoothened off and their personas could be quite complete in some ways. Similarly, with the poet Kamalagne, physical Kavi Sammelans would only get you so far. Would be a few thousands or tens of thousands sometimes. But with a platform like YouTube, for instance, his videos are now viewed millions and millions of times, all constantly. So their audience base has increased manifold. They have been able to reach newer audiences, not just in India, but also in different countries. As I say, from my personal example of how my relatives in the UK also were fans of some of these people and were wanting to donate and support these people. So the internet has really done that. It's really opened up the world for all of these three pop stars.
The question of the role of social media I found particularly interesting in the case of Sandeep because you talk about how he's very suspicious of big tech, that he started his own e-commerce platform because he didn't want to be on Amazon. So, how does someone like that, I mean, through your reporting, through your observations, how does someone like that balance these two worlds? And what does the future hold for him if he is going to be so deeply suspicious of YouTube, of Amazon, of any big tech platform?
I mean, look, it's amazing what he's been able to pull so far with all of his thoughts, his suspicions, his skepticism of these platforms. Here is a guy who runs a publishing house, which focuses on Hindutva books, but refuses to, sort of take the services of the biggest publisher that there is right now, which is Amazon, and which is, platforms like Flipkart. So he says these guys are anti-Hindu and I don't want to depend on them. And sort of he's, started his own e-commerce site where he sells all of his books. Yet he's been actually able to create quite a bit of space for himself. The fact that this guy is sitting in this office in Uttam Nagar in Delhi is able to send 25,000 odd books across the world, not just in India but across the world, and is able to sort of constantly use the rhetoric as well. That's the other important part, right? It's the rhetoric of not wanting to sort of take the support of any platforms which are anti-Hindu or any entities which are anti-Hindu. So he's constantly using that as something that is burnishing his credentials, and then sort of channeling all of the people and their rage towards his own e-commerce platform. So I think what we see here is a very interesting intermix of rhetoric with commerce, right? So they're not saying we're not going to do that. They're saying we will beat them at what they're doing. So we will beat the Amazons of the world. His suspicion is also towards YouTube, because he thinks that YouTube is constantly shadow banning him and not letting him grow. So what he's now started doing is that he's created an app for himself where he's now live streaming a lot of his videos that would earlier only be on YouTube. So he's constantly, sort of reinventing and thinking of how he can beat all of these different platforms, all of the different monopolies or duopolies that exist in these worlds, and still be able to do what he's doing. So, I mean, I would say, he's sometimes a couple of steps ahead of them, where he's already thinking of guerrilla tactics in which he can still use what he's doing to be able to draw crowds towards his platforms, and that is what I find is sometimes so insidious and so sort of dangerous in some ways about this world as well, because they're not just making do with what is given to them. They're constantly reinventing, they're constantly looking at different ways in which all of these platforms can be used to further the cause of Hindutva, to further constantly attack enemies of Hindutva, and to set the narratives that they want to set.
In the case of Kavi as well, you mentioned that she has also had to modify her content, right? Because YouTube kept shadow banning her. So do you think this is part of a wider trend that a lot of these influencers, a lot of these pop stars will have to start seeking like alternative means, whether, I think it was Sandeep, you said that now live streams on Twitch as well. So is this part of a larger trend? Are more of them harboring these suspicions, are feeling just unsatisfied with the platforms they're currently on?
I think they are feeling unsuspicious, and they sometimes feel very disappointed. In my reporting of the last 4 years, when I would go and meet some of them, they would constantly have complaints about these platforms. They would say, Facebook is sort of blocking my ID, or YouTube is taking down my videos. My monetization on YouTube has stopped. So there is always that worry. That what if my sort of the plug is pulled on my online persona. But I think not a lot of them have the tact and the resources to be able to set up their alternatives. So what happens is, for instance, someone like Kamal Agne, the poet, his account, he says, has been, sort of his Facebook account has been mass reported because of his poetry against Muslims, against Gandhi, against Pakistan. And so he constantly finds himself in trouble because his accounts are constantly banned and blocked by some of these platforms. So what he does is he just creates a new platform. He just creates a new profile, for himself. And even though he has some professional help when he does that, he doesn't really, sort of see an alternative beyond a Facebook or a YouTube. Whereas a Sandeep Dev has the, sort of has the experience and has the wisdom to be able to create alternatives for himself. So we see in this world people with very different sort of capabilities when it comes to their online profiles and management of profiles. But I think what unites all of them is this sort of commitment towards Hindutva and commitment towards pushing the Hindutva message no matter what. So even Kamal, for instance, even if he's been banned by Facebook a few times, he'll always come back again. He will always again upload the same videos. He will always upload the same incendiary rhetoric filled poetry against Muslims, against Nehru, against Gandhi, all of them. He will continue to do that. So what I don't see with them is any sense of their commitment getting diluted because the platforms are punishing them. They know that all it takes is yet another attempt, and they'll be back on the platform again. And I think that's a broader conversation that we must all be having about how policy does or does not regulate all of this content on our social media streams.
You also, in the beginning of the book, you talk about the real world implications of such content, which was also what drove you to write the book. So, can you just tell us a bit about that, what that experience was like?
So I start off the book with a story about how I really got into this world, right? And then you've read the book, and Antra, you know the story. This was really, something that jolted me and brought me face to face with a very different side of this world that we are now living in. Even though journalists like you and me are constantly encountering this new India, I think there are dimensions to this new India that we don't always see in front of us. And one such dimension came face to face in March, April 2019, when I was in a small town in Jharkhand called Gumla. And sort of the book really begins with how the town, which always has had a history of very syncretic traditions of celebrating Ram Navami together, where the Muslims would come, they would worship, and they would sort of garland all of the processionists in the Ram Navami processions. That one time in 2017 of April, when they didn't do that, and the reason behind everything that happened that evening, and I don't want to give out much in our conversation, but everything that happened, which ended up with the loss of a life of a Muslim young boy, all of that could be in some ways linked to a song that was played in the Ram Navami procession, which nearly triggered a riot in that small town of Jharkhand. And then when you come face to face with some of this evidence of how this is causing real life effects and sometimes even damage, I think that's when you realize that it is necessary that all of us take charge and just listen to what these songs, what these poems, read some of these books that are being brought out, and try and understand why this is happening, and try and understand that this is an India which is changing very, very drastically. And some of this pop culture is driving this very fast change.
Definitely. So, another sort of dimension to Hindutva pop culture, how the government is sort of manipulating it, how they're kind of pushing these agendas forward, how they're sort of sinking their teeth into social media is AI. So, how do you think, what is the kind of role you feel that artificial intelligence, these AI generated songs, what is the kind of role you think that they will play again in the run up to the elections? Or is it something that you kind of observed during your travels? Were these AI generated songs, were they on the people you met, were they on their radar as well? This AI Modi you see literally now plastered on every social media platform.
So not yet, Antra. I mean, my
Yeah.
reporting time was largely from 2019 April to
Oh, right.
to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
August of this year, which is really
Yeah.
when I finalized my manuscript. So I, at least in that time, I didn't see AI really making very severe dents into this world.
Of course,
But
yeah.
what I do see is there is even now a very heavy reliance on technology, and I'll tell you why. Because I would go often to some of these studios where the music, the Hindutva pop music, would be recorded, and I would travel to these studios which are often in semi-rural sort of towns of the country, sometimes in Haryana, sometimes in UP, and I would often see that there was no music composer left anymore for this. They do, of course, in the song credits they do mention a music composer, but often the music composer would really just be the guy who would be sitting on the system, getting auto tune to crank up a tune for the song, and that's it. So some of these songs are already being recorded and already being produced within a span of a couple of hours. For instance, the song that I witnessed being recorded, that song, the tune was made in about an hour or so. So and this is again technology which is making this possible. So I feel what AI will do is will only, sort of hasten this process even more, where, the hour-long process that it takes to compose the song will possibly take half an hour or take 40 minutes or so. So I feel like the production of this content is only going to get slicker and faster, and hence there will be more content coming our ways. So that is really what I'm going to be seeing as one impact. The other thing that happens is, especially on social media platforms, is that some of these creators don't often have the resources to create videos for their songs. So at this point, what they do is they just have some album art on YouTube, and then there's an audio song playing in the background. Now, with AI and with some of the animation and some of the graphics that are possible with AI, what we're going to be seeing is also, as you said, maybe like an AI image of Modi, maybe Yogi, some of these characters, you being used in these songs as well. So the Hindutva pop content will very automatically and organically sort of intersperse with very, very dominant direct political images of our day. And I think that is one thing that we will definitely see in the times to come.
Definitely. I mean, I think your book is really just the beginning of the wormhole. I think there's so much more to be uncovered. And I think that's why, I mean, thank you all for joining us. And also, this is necessary reading. Anyone who's, I feel, interested in New India should sort of go out there, buy this book. And Kunal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure, Antara. Thank you so much.